I walked into my daughter's wedding in my best suit, clutching the invitation with pride, but my seat was shoved to the very back, near the restroom, like I didn't belong. When I tried to give a toast, my own child cut me off, silencing me in front of everyone. It cut deeper than words. After years of sacrifice working late shifts, paying her tuition, even selling land for her future, I was treated like a stranger. But under my plate, I found an envelope. Inside, proof that I had paid nearly $500,000 for this wedding. And then, I noticed a stranger watching me from across the room, as if he knew everything. Follow my story until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment the city you're watching from, so I know how far my story travels. The morning air in Charleston carried the faint sweetness of blooming azaleas as I adjusted my tie in the reflection of the car window. The suit was the finest I owned. One my late wife always said made me look younger. For a moment, her voice echoed in memory, soft and encouraging, as if she were still by my side. The invitation rested carefully in my hand, the paper already creased from how tightly I had been holding it. Today was supposed to be about joy. My daughter's wedding, a day where I thought I might feel included, even honored. Instead, as I stepped into the grand venue, an uneasy feeling trailed behind the polished marble floors and elegant chandeliers, like a shadow refusing to lift. The hall brimmed with chatter, glasses clinking, dresses shimmering. Families greeted each other with warmth, hugs, and laughter. I smiled politely, adjusting my jacket, but the warmth never quite reached me. I nodded to distant relatives, received a few shallow smiles in return, and reminded myself this is her day. I would not allow my heart to sour the moment. Yet even as I tried to savor the beauty of the setting, a subtle distance pressed against me. The joy around me didn't quite touch my skin. It only reminded me how far I seemed from it all. When I found my seat, my steps faltered. My name card sat at the very last table tucked behind a column, near the restroom doors. The chairs around me were occupied by people I barely recognized, distant acquaintances at best. It was the sort of placement meant for obligations, not for fathers. My chest tightened, though I kept my face calm. No one seemed to notice as I set the card back down and lowered myself into the chair. Conversations flowed around me, easy and bright. Yet I might as well have been invisible. It was humiliation wrapped in silence. I whispered under my breath, "It's her day. Don't make it about you." Still, the sting lingered, sharp and quiet. I tried to shake it off, rising to greet familiar relatives as they passed. Each time, I was met with hurried nods, distracted glances, and excuses about needing to find someone else. Even the photographer, weaving between tables with practiced cheer, swept right past me. His camera lens captured smiling faces, clasped hands, radiant laughter, but never turned in my direction. I stood still as if waiting for him to notice, only to watch him pivot away with no acknowledgement, defeated. I sat again, folding my hands in my lap. The sound of cutlery, the murmur of voices, even the violin's melody seemed to fold over me, muffling my presence. A heavy silence settled on my shoulders. That silence was broken by something unintended. From behind me, two voices drifted over, hushed but not hushed enough. "Make sure he doesn't talk about the past or the money he put in." A nervous laugh followed, another voice whispering agreement. For a second, I thought I had misheard, but the words hung in the air, sharp as glass. My breath caught, and the edges of the room blurred. Every contribution, every hour of labor, every sacrifice that had once kept this family standing reduced to a secret best left unspoken. I reached for my glass of water, my hand trembling slightly. If I had doubted my invisibility before, this confirmed it. To them, my voice was not welcome. Still, I raised my glass, quietly, to myself. No one joined. No one noticed. The tremor in my hand betrayed the steadiness I tried to show. Forcing a shallow sip, I lowered the glass back to the table and stared down at the linen. That was when I noticed it in an envelope, sealed and discreet, tucked neatly under my plate. My name was written on it in an unfamiliar hand. For a moment, confusion mingled with dread. Who had left it there? And why the music swelled. Laughter carried across the tables. But all I could see was that envelope, its white edges sharp against the cloth. I slid it closer. My heart caught between curiosity and hesitation. Was it kindness, or something else entirely? The decision loomed to open it now, in front of strangers, or to wait until I was alone. The envelope lay heavy in my hand, like it carried more than paper. My fingers brushed over the edge, the sealed flap already loosened from the warmth of my palm. For a moment, I considered slipping it into my jacket pocket and waiting until later, when I'd be home and alone. But the curiosity ate at me, stronger than my caution. I bent low, pulling my chair a little closer to the table so no one would notice. My hands, rough and veined with age, worked quietly beneath the white linen. The tear of the flap sounded louder to me than it probably was. I slipped the paper out, unfolding it slowly under the dim light. My eyes traced the numbers at the top of the page, my breath catching when I realized what I was holding: a receipt. Not just any receipt, but a copy of the deposit made for this very wedding venue. The handwriting on the notation was mine, the date stamped clear. Months ago, I had signed that check, paying nearly everything up front when my daughter said she and her fiancé were struggling. So why was this here, left under my plate, like some cruel reminder? Why hadn't she acknowledged me today? Not even once, for what I had sacrificed. My throat tightened. A part of me wanted to stand up and shout, to hold the receipt high for everyone to see. Instead, I folded the paper, slipped it back into the envelope, and pushed it deep into my pocket. Not tonight, I thought. Not yet. This was still her day, and I had no intention of ruining it. Moments later, the MC's voice boomed across the room, and now, a few words from the bride's father. The spotlight shifted in my direction, and all at once the tables turned toward me. My heart thumped hard against my chest. Slowly, I pushed back my chair and stood. The suit I wore suddenly felt too tight, the collar scratching at my neck. I gripped the microphone, steadying myself. For a fleeting moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe this would be the moment to honor my late wife, to speak her name so she could be remembered here too. My lips parted. When my Mary was alive, I began, voice thick. She always dreamed of this day. But before I could continue, a sharp voice cut through the room. Let's keep this short. Dad, no need to drag the past into tonight. It was my daughter. Her hand was on her husband's arm, her smile fixed for the crowd, but her eyes dismissive. Cold. A few tables chuckled. The MC stepped in, gently tugging the microphone away. My words, the blessing I had carried in my heart, vanished under the noise of laughter and clinking glasses. I sank back into my chair, heat rising up my neck. My glass of champagne trembled as I lifted it, pretending to sip, pretending I was fine. Inside, shame pressed down like a weight I couldn't shake. Around me, the celebration roared on, the music swelling, guests laughing. I might as well have been invisible. My fingers brushed against the envelope in my pocket once more. It was there, pulsing like a secret, demanding to be heard. I glanced across the room and froze. A man I didn't recognize was watching me. His gaze was steady, unblinking, like he knew exactly what I held. Our eyes locked, my pulse quickened. Friend, or enemy, the envelope in my pocket felt heavier than it should have been, as if it carried the weight of years I could never get back. My fingers brushed against it, and suddenly memories pressed in, uninvited. long nights on construction sites, working overtime until my hands ached, selling off a small piece of land my wife and I once dreamed of retiring on. Every sacrifice had a name, and that name was my daughter. I remembered signing the check that cleared her college debt. The ink had barely dried when my wife's voice echoed in my head, gentle but firm. It's for her future. That's what we've always wanted. She had been right then, and I wanted to believe she was still right now. But the way my daughter had dismissed me at her own wedding made those sacrifices feel like shadows on a wall fading. Meaningless. Forgotten. The air inside the hall felt suffocating. I slipped out the side door, into the cool evening breeze. The muffled music drifted behind me while I leaned against a brick wall, trying to steady my breathing. The sky was tinged orange, fading to purple, but its beauty only deepened the ache in my chest. Laughter drew my attention to a group of relatives standing just a few feet away. They clinked their glasses, tipsy and careless, their words carrying further than they realized. He always acts like he built everything. One voice sneered. Truth is, he just threw money around to feel important. The words cut deeper than any knife. My jaw tightened, my hand curling into a fist against the envelope. Did they really think that's all it was, money? Did they not see the nights I came home too tired to speak? The weekends I skipped rest to pay tuition? The years I carried the family on my back when everything threatened to fall apart? I pressed the envelope tighter against my chest, as though it could shield me. Not a single tear escaped, though the sting behind my eyes burned. The dignity I had left would not be surrendered here. Not to drunken whispers. I walked back into the reception hall, face calm, steps steady, as though nothing had touched me. My daughter stood across the room, smiling with her new husband, radiant in her joy. But she didn't glance my way. The distance between us stretched wider than the space in that hall. And I wondered, was it only the relatives' cruelty? Or had she herself fed those words into their ears? Did she truly believe I had done nothing more than throw money around? The thought clawed at me, but another resolve rose stronger. The truth would come out. Not yet, not in anger, but in time, at the moment when none of them could ignore it. The insult from the patio kept echoing through the hall, sharper than the clink of glassware. It wasn't the words alone. It was how easily they slipped from familiar mouths, as if kindness had been replaced by a script handed out at the door. A band launched into a Motown classic, and couples spun beneath Edison bulbs. But the melody only scraped against a raw place that hadn't healed in years. The envelope pressed against the lining of the jacket like a heartbeat that wasn't sure it wanted to go on. Across the room, the bride stood in a pocket of light, laughing with bridesmaids who had been children at backyard cookouts not so long ago. She'd switched to flats, one heel dangling from her finger, the other tucked into a satin bag. For a moment, the memory of a little girl whose feet used to stand on mine while we danced in the kitchen threatened to lift everything. Then the present dropped it again. The stranger from earlier had drifted to the far side of the bar, half shadow, half intent, eyes landing on me with the patience of someone waiting his turn. Under the music, a steady thought formed. Waiting had not served well so far. A father can carry silence like a coat through winter, but sometimes it freezes to the skin. There would be no scene, no raised voice to stain her night. Just a few words a responsible parent says when the world around a child looks louder than it is wise. She moved away from the crowd to adjust her bouquet on a high-top table. The space by the window gave a view of Charleston's rooftops, copper catching the last of the light. Stepping into that sliver of quiet, a greeting came out simple, the way weather is said when feelings don't trust themselves. She turned, smile polite, tired at the edges. Be careful with what you've tied yourself to. Slipped out low and even. Weddings cost more than they show. So do promises. Her shoulders drew up like string pulled too tight. "Please, not tonight," she said, soft but firm. "Don't ruin this. No call for understanding." No question about what worry sat behind the words. The sentence shut the window and drew the drapes in one motion. Air thinned. It wasn't anger that rose. It was the old ache of talking to a door you used to have a key for. A nod kept everything inside its walls. The bouquet rustled as she pivoted back toward her circle, relief on her face so quick it stung worse than scorn. Movement near the bar pulled attention. The groom had been listening. He didn't bother to hide it. He sauntered over with sleeves pushed to his forearms, a cufflink still undone like rebellion dressed up for company. Guests sensed a moment and drifted closer, laughter rolling forward like a shoreline. The band dialed down, the bass player's hand hovering above the strings, waiting to see if applause or trouble would ask to be accompanied. The groom lifted his glass. The room's glow made the rim sparkle, the ice inside clicking a lazy warning. "Don't worry, old man," he called, just loud enough for proximity to turn it into spectacle. "I'll take care of what you never could." A chuckle broke from somewhere behind him and multiplied. It wasn't a roar. It was worse, a spray of little laughs that asked permission to be cruel and got it. The words landed square, as if they had been measured and leveled with a carpenter's care. Shoulders straightened. Hands stayed loose. Silence did its job, kept dignity standing. Refused to give them the show they thought they'd purchased with a rented tux and a microphone. The bride's face flashed alarm, then smoothed into a hostess smile trained for crises that must not leave a mark on photographs. She slipped a hand through her husband's arm and towed him toward a cluster of cousins, turning the moment into a joke the way a bartender stirs bitterness into something sweet. The guests, grateful for permission to move on, followed their cue. Distance reasserted itself. From the edge of the dance floor, the room looked like a diorama, tiny, beautiful, sealed behind glass. The stranger was there again, no longer pretending not to watch. He leaned a hip against the bar, a man comfortable with time, and tapped 2 fingers against his own suit pocket, a gesture light as a moth batting at a porch light. The message slid across the space clean, he knew. A step back gave the crowd to itself. The planner swept by to check candles and napkins, her headset murmuring with invisible voices. A tray of miniature shrimp and grits passed. The server offered, eyes kind in the way strangers sometimes are when family forgets how. The dish smelled like home and Sundays and everything a house builds without announcing it. The plate remained untouched. Words rattled quietly behind clenched teeth, then settled. No one here needed a lecture. No one would hear it if one came. The truth had its own feet and would arrive when it chose. Until then, breath in, breath out, watch, count the beats, keep the hands steady. The father-daughter dance began. Applause rose, then softened into the hush that follows tradition. Another man, someone chosen for the role, stepped onto the floor. He had the easy posture of a neighbor who mows in straight lines and always returns borrowed tools. She placed her hand on his shoulder, chin lifted. The band found a gentle tempo. Around the circle, guests wiped at corners of eyes with napkins they would later tuck into jackets like proof they had felt something. Feet stayed planted. The song ended. Cheers swelled. In the echo, one thought kept itself small, and useful storms are survived by the houses that trust their foundations. The envelope tapped a rhythm against the ribs. Paper on cloth. Paper on bone. The stranger's fingers drummed in time. When the band kicked into a faster number, he detached from the bar and, with patience that made the gesture feel like a courtesy, nodded once toward the veranda doors. No hurrying met him. The glass doors opened, letting in a tide of humid air. Outside, the garden lights laced the oaks like quiet constellations. He waited at the railing, giving space as if to say the next choice belonged entirely to the man who had paid too much to be told what to do with his own night. Approaching. The wood beneath dress shoes sounded like a metronome set to a calm heart. Up close, his face carried the wear of someone who had seen families paint over rot with pretty colors. He didn't introduce himself first. He glanced at the pocket again, then back up with an apology already in the eyes. "Didn't mean to make a show of it," he said. "Figured you might want to know you're not crazy." The accent placed him here in this city long enough to know its weather and its secrets. You have something that doesn't belong in a stranger's jacket. And yet there it is. The envelope warmed under the palm. You left it. The question came out flat. Not accusing, not welcoming. "No," he said, and flicked his gaze toward the hall. "But I know who did. And why." He rested his elbows on the rail, as if giving the night permission to carry what people could not. "If you want to keep pretending everything's fine, I can finish this drink, wish them well, and be gone. If you're done pretending, we step back inside at your pace." The ballroom's reflection wavered in the glass lights. Confetti, the choreography of joy. The groom's laugh rose above it like a brass horn out of tune. Inside, someone called for another round of speeches. A young voice yelled shots, and the crowd answered as if youth were a currency that could be spent to buy more time. The stranger straightened. His hand made that same small motion toward the pocket. Not a command, a signal. A slow breath drew the night in. Salt and magnolia with a hint of the river. The next words were quiet enough to be mistaken for agreement with the breeze. "Who are you?" "Someone who hates waste," he said. "Especially the kind of waste that comes from people forgetting where the money came from." His eyes sharpened. "Not unkind. Heard what the groom said. Folks like that spend other people's sacrifices like free samples." A beat passed. The music swelled behind the glass. The door handle felt cool. Ready. The envelope sat where it had been all evening. A small, stubborn drum. The stranger's patience didn't falter. He only lifted his chin toward the room, as if inviting a decision and promising to match it. Inside, the MC tapped the mic, asking for attention. A request for blessings, for more stories, for another round of polished gratitude, rolled across the floor like a call to worship. The pulse in the wrist matched the bass line. The hand moved to the pocket. Paper whispered. The stranger nodded once, crisp as a yes. The door closed behind us with a hush, and the stranger's nod settled like a hand on my shoulder. The envelope rasped beneath my thumb, paper against paper, as if asking a simple question: how long will you let them write your story? Laughter moved across the room like a tide that forgot who it drowned. Enough. Back inside. Heat and perfume met me. Then the murmur of guests. I walked past the bar, past the oaks framed in lights, straight for the head table. Hearts don't sprint at my age. They drum slow and heavy, but resolve carries its own pulse. The groom spotted me and straightened, a grin already curving like a hook. My daughter lifted her face, cautious, older than she should look on a wedding night. I stopped at the end of the table. "I won't let my life's work be turned into your game." The words came out even, not loud, but they carried. Chairs stilled, forks paused mid-air. The planner froze, headset halfway to her ear. The groom chuckled, low and rehearsed. "Dad, please," my daughter said. "You're making a scene." A scene was made. I answered, when respect left the room and arrogance took my chair. The envelope's edge pressed a thin line into my palm. I thought of the check for the venue, the years of overtime, the house sold to clear a debt that wasn't mine. None of it made me noble. It made me family. The groom leaned in, voice pitched for the audience he believed he deserved. "This is why no one takes you seriously." He dragged the last word. Lazy and sharp, my hand hit the linen before I meant it to. A flat crack that silenced the nearest table. Glasses trembled. A napkin slid to the floor like a white flag no one had raised. My daughter flinched, shame coloring her cheeks, then anger trying to wash it off, around us. Conversation fractured into small, hungry pieces. "Calm down," an uncle said, stepping between me and the couple, palms out like I was a fire he could pat out. "He's right," a cousin countered, eyes bright with the relief of truth. "He paid for more than any of you know. College, the apartment. Half this night." Those words rippled faster than music. Guests looked at one another, calculation replacing ease. At the far end, an aunt whispered that I always liked to make things about myself. Her sister reminded her who kept their lights on the winter the roof caved. Two groomsmen smirked. A bridesmaid stared at the floor. Honest air, once released, stung like rubbing alcohol. My daughter's jaw tightened. "We asked you to keep tonight light," she said through her smile, the public face still working while the private one hid. "You're embarrassing me. Embarrassment requires conscience," I said quietly. "I'm asking for perspective." The groom tipped his glass at me. "Perspective is that it's our night. You had your turn." He glanced at the crowd, inviting laughter. Some did, some didn't. The stranger from the veranda slipped near the edge of the group, invisible the way only observant men can be. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Presence can be a kind of proof. Another cousin stepped forward, voice shaking. "He co-signed the first bakery lease," she said, pointing at the groom. "When things went bad, he covered it. And he never told anyone." Her mother tugged at her sleeve, but the sentence was out, hovering above the table like a verdict looking for a gavel. My patience, already thin, frayed. "No more pretending," I said. "If you want me quiet, you earn the silence with honesty." The vow surprised even me with its steadiness. The room split, not into clean halves but into jagged islands. On one, relatives begged for peace. On another, old irritations found microphones. Years of swallowed comments surfaced wearing tuxedos. The band gave up. The singer shut her eyes and let the silence hold. I saw it then, the mask of perfect family sliding off in front of strangers we might never see again. Maybe that was mercy. Better they see the crack than the plaster I kept spreading. My daughter stood straighter, as if posture could build the bridge my words had burned. Her eyes drifted everywhere but to mine. She reached for the groom's hand, and he gave it. Triumphant. The pose said unity. The eyes said deal. Something settled in my chest. Not anger now, not grief, but a clean, cool line. If they wanted me small, they would have to make me disappear themselves. I would not hand them the eraser. "If you force me out tonight," I said, "so only the nearest heard, I will return with proof no one can deny." Hush folded over us, thinner than cloth, heavier than guilt. The groom tried to laugh again but couldn't find the note. My daughter's lip trembled. And for a heartbeat, the little girl who once stood on my shoes to dance reached for my sleeve from somewhere far away. Then she let go. Adults chose. I stepped back from the table. The crowd opened like a tide parting around a stone. The planner exhaled. Someone started clapping. It died before it could become a thing. The envelope lay warm against my ribs. Weapon wasn't the right word. Tools don't hate what they fix. This one would simply cut away the rot and show the beams. Either the house would stand, or we would learn what we'd been living under. I turned toward the doors, toward quiet. No one stopped me. That, more than anything said aloud, told the truth. I closed my hand around the envelope and felt it answer back with its papery spine. Tomorrow had a voice again. The ballroom noise fell behind me like surf as a side door clicked shut. In the dim side hall, the air felt cooler, honest. A string of service lights hummed along the baseboard, guiding the way past stacked chairs and a silver cart that smelled faintly of lemons. Boots steadied on old wood. The envelope that had ridden the night against my chest slid back into my hands, edges softened by worry and sweat. One breath, another. The tremor in my fingers wasn't fear anymore. It was focus. I eased the papers out and laid them on the cart beneath the light. The receipt sat on top. A clean copy with the venue's header and a date stamped 6 months ago. Under it, something heavier, a contract page, carbon printed, with blocks for initials and a signature line at the bottom. Seeing my name printed above the line was normal enough. Seeing my name written on the line was not. The loop in the J rose too tall. The tail on the Y took a flourish I never learned. My hand writes like a carpenter measures square and short. No extra curve unless it pays rent. This signature wore a costume and forgot the shoes. The mind has its own clock. It flipped through years in a heartbeat, signing mortgage papers next to my late wife while she squeezed my hand twice to say we were fine. Co-signing a car note so my girl could get to her college classes when the bus schedule failed her. The trust paperwork after the funeral. The ink blurring because grief and ink share a color when they're fresh. My signature never stood up straight like a showman. It leans into the line the way I leaned into work. And on this page, the pen pretended otherwise. Heat moved behind my eyes, not the kind that makes a man shout, the kind that tightens his jaw until he can bite through rope. Someone decided my consent could be manufactured, not asked for, not earned, forged. The word fit the page like a stamp. If they were willing to borrow my name for the ink, what else had they borrowed without asking? Identity isn't a grand thing you keep in a vault. It's the daily habit of telling the truth about who you are. Tonight, someone wrote a lie with my letters. Music swelled on the other side of the door, the band finding a Motown groove, horns bright and sure. Somewhere in the middle of that song, a younger man was dipping my daughter and making her laugh for the camera. In the side hall, a lemon slice dried on a saucer and stuck to the china like a false smile. The contrast mocked me, but it also clarified what needed doing. I held the contract closer to the light, tracing the strokes. The initial blocks were filled. 2. Same confidence, same swagger in the curve. The deposit amount matched the figure on the receipt copy, the name of the account. A family account we once used when bills stacked higher than paychecks. It had been dormant since the estate settled should have been. Anyway. The bank branch listed was one where the manager still sent Christmas cards. It takes gall to commit a small crime in a familiar lobby. It takes certainty that the victim won't look too closely or won't want the trouble if he does. Faces flashed through memory men from the hardware store, clamping their lips around stories about cousins with checkbooks and bad habits. A neighbor who found out his nephew had been borrowing the Social Security check. A church friend who discovered a second mortgage he never asked for. Initials neat as Sunday. Their shame always sounded the same. I should have known. Shame is a trick. It points at the wounded and says the blood is your fault. The trick ends when somebody names the cut for what it is. Enough learning. Time to act. I slid the papers back into the envelope and tucked it inside my jacket. Inner pocket snug as a holster. The phone felt heavy in my palm. Old and trustworthy. My thumb found the number without thinking. Years ago, the man who answered had walked me through probate when my hands shook too hard to hold a pen. He never rushed me. Never talked down. He let silence do its work, then used the law to carry what silence could not. "Evening," he said, voice low and rested. "Sorry it's late," I answered. I wouldn't call unless it mattered. "It matters." "Then," he said. "What's wrong?" "Found my name on a contract I didn't sign." I said, "Deposit tied to tonight. Initials too. Same hand. Not mine." He didn't fill the pause with comfort. "Good men leave room for truth. You have copies in my pocket. Receipt, contract page. Good. Don't confront anyone. Keep them clean. No coffee stains or notes. Tomorrow morning, 8:30. My office. I'll call the bank first thing. Have them pull the original file and any surveillance tied to the day. Bring ID. We'll start a paper trail and lock it down." I imagined his desk, the neat row of pens, the framed photo of his daughter in scrubs, Work that fixes hurt often sits in small rooms with blinds half open. "Thank you," I said. "One more thing," he added. "This won't just be about a signature. If they used that old account, we'll need statements. Don't warn them. Let the records talk." A breath steadied. "Understood. Get some rest if you can," he said. "And whatever tonight is, don't let it make you sloppy. Rage is easy. Proof is power." We said goodnight. I stood in the side hall longer than I needed to, letting the phone cool in my pocket and the plan warm up in my chest. The first move had been made, and it wasn't a speech. It was a call. Back in the ballroom, light spilled like champagne, washing the edges of the crowd. Laughter stitched the spaces between tables where an hour ago there had been little wars. People are quick to mend what they can see if it keeps them from looking at what they can't. I moved along the wall. Just another older man in a dark suit, taking the long way around a room that had already told him where he belonged. Near the dance floor, my daughter swayed with her husband, forehead to his jaw, eyes closed. A photographer circled them in soft steps. For a moment, grief tried to climb back onto my shoulders and ride me like a tired horse. It didn't make it. Grief helps you forgive. Evidence helps you decide. Both have work to do. They just take turns. I caught my reflection in the window glass, gray at the temples, shoulders still square. Tie a little off because perfect is a poor disguise for pain. The envelope pressed against my ribs like a friend leaning in to say, "Keep going," past the bar. A server threaded through guests with a tray of coffee cups. I waved him off and headed for the door instead. Caffeine wasn't the backbone I needed. At the threshold, someone brushed by and muttered that weddings bring out the worst in families. Maybe. They also bring out the truth. When the lights are bright and the camera's ready, lies get tired faster. The night air met me like a faithful dog, cool, uncomplicated, loyal. Oaks reached up to the moon and made lace out of its light on the brick path. Somewhere down the street, a golf cart hummed, ferrying late guests to cars they would pretend not to have had that last drink in. I stood under the trees and let the quiet lay its hand on my chest. They think I'm powerless. The thought formed, clean as a sign. It wasn't bitter. It was accurate. Then another line, just as simple tomorrow. They'll learn otherwise. Speaking it aloud felt less like a threat and more like a promise kept to a man who once looked back at me from a younger mirror and asked for a spine. I tucked the envelope deeper, like a seed set an inch lower to beat a late frost. The door opened behind me. Music spilled out again. Full of brass and hope. I didn't turn. Hope can play without me for one song. Morning would be work. Bank records, originals, a careful walk through the dates, a question or two to a manager who knows my handshake, copy machines humming, a scanner capturing more than ink, capturing the moment a story changes shape because the facts finally claim their seat at the table. I breathed in the city, a little salt from the river, a little sweetness from the wisteria, a little ghost of cigarette smoke from the alley, and walked back inside with a face no one could read. That's not secrecy. That's stewardship. Some truths demand a closed door until the hinges are ready. Across the room, my daughter threw her head back and laughed at something her husband whispered. Youth is a fine coat. It just doesn't stop every wind. The coat will thin. The wind will keep coming, I prayed. Not for their lesson to hurt, but for it to stick. The plan in my pocket beat like a second heart. Paper has rhythm if you listen. The morning light in Charleston crept through the blinds of my small motel room. The wedding was behind me, but the sting lingered. The envelope still rested in my jacket pocket, heavy with its ugly secret. I drove to meet Robert, an old friend who'd practiced law longer than most of my relatives had been alive. He adjusted his glasses as he examined the paper, running his finger over the signature. "This isn't yours," he said quietly. "But they'll say it is. And worse, if anyone claims you gave it willingly, the burden's on you to prove otherwise." The words pressed like a stone on my chest. For years, I'd been the man who provided, the one who put others ahead of himself. Now, that history could be twisted against me. By afternoon, whispers had already started. My phone buzzed with messages from cousins, neighbors, even old church friends. They said the groom was telling everyone I'd blessed the money, that I was proud to hand it over. Some added that maybe I was confused, my memory failing at my age, confused, senile, words sharper than any knife. I had lived through decades of sacrifice, but never had my name been spoken with such doubt. Later that day, I found my daughter alone in the reception hall, gathering leftover flowers. Her shoulders tensed when I approached. "Do you believe that I would forget giving away my own house?" The question escaped before I could soften it. Her lips trembled, but she wouldn't look at me. That silence was worse than outright denial. In her refusal to speak, I heard everything: her fear, her doubt, her choice to side with him. At a smaller family gathering that evening, I faced the cruelest blow. My cousin Gerald, half drunk and eager to play hero, declared. I saw him nod. He agreed to it. He gave them everything. The room gasped. A dozen eyes darted toward me, waiting for my denial, waiting to measure whether I was lucid or lost. The lies echoed louder than my truth. Inside, fury burned, but I kept my face still. To lash out would feed their story. To stay calm was the only weapon I had left in that moment. That night, lying awake, I understood the fight had changed. This was no longer about money or even the forged paper. This was about dignity, about whether my life's sacrifices would be erased by deceit. If they wanted war, I wouldn't fight alone. Somewhere, someone knew the truth. And as I closed my eyes, the image of that stranger from the wedding returned. The man who had watched me, signaling something about the envelope. Maybe he was the key. The drive to their new home felt longer than it was. My hands stayed tight on the wheel, mind looping over every whisper and lie from the day before. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house stood like a monument to betrayal, shiny and new, yet built on the bones of my sacrifices. Inside, the air was heavy. Relatives clustered in corners, their voices hushed but sharp. Some stared at me openly. Others dropped their eyes as though I carried shame they didn't want to catch. I didn't bother hiding the envelope anymore. I set it on the table, firm and deliberate, the sound of paper on wood silencing the room. "This isn't a gift," I said, voice cutting through the murmurs. "This is fraud." Gasps echoed. I pulled out the forged signature, the receipts, every proof I had. The groom leaned back in his chair, lips twisting into a mocking smile. "Everyone knows you forget things, old man," he sneered. A few chuckled nervously, as if laughing could save them from the truth rising in front of them. My daughter's eyes darted between us, her face pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Around us, relatives argued, some defending me, others shaking their heads, unsure which side to choose. The room vibrated with division. Then the door opened. A figure stepped in, familiar, yet unexpected. The stranger from the wedding. He cleared his throat, drawing every eye. "I'm the venue manager," he said evenly. From his briefcase came papers, stamped and official. "Here are the records." It was the groom who insisted on using this man's name. He pushed the papers through, signed in his stead. The room fell into stunned silence. Gasps rippled, breaking against the walls like waves. The groom jumped to his feet, face flushed. "Lies," he barked, pointing a shaking finger. But the crack in his composure spread wide for everyone to see. I said nothing. My silence was louder than his denial. The weight of truth pressed against every corner of that room. For the first time in years, my daughter looked me squarely in the eyes. Her voice broke into a whisper, trembling and afraid. Dad, is it true? Chapter 9. The Shattered Illusion. The silence after the stranger's testimony hung thick in the air. Every pair of eyes in that room seemed to search for something solid to hold on to. But all anyone found was uncertainty. I could hear the whispers breaking out like small fires, some casting suspicion toward the groom, others muttering excuses to keep the fragile illusion intact. My daughter sat stiffly at the table, her fingers trembling as they wrapped around her glass. She avoided her husband's eyes, as though afraid of what she might see if she looked too long. For the first time that evening, I saw her shield slipping. I stayed quiet, watching, waiting. The truth had been spoken, but words are fragile things in a family where appearances matter more than honesty. It was her reaction I was watching now. I wanted to see if she would keep clinging to the lie or finally face it. Her lips parted, and for a moment it seemed like nothing would come out. Then she spoke, voice tight and hesitant. "Show them," she said softly to her husband. "Show them the proof you have." The groom's face shifted, a crack forming in the confident mask he had worn so easily all evening. He barked a laugh, sharp and defensive. "What proof? Don't start doubting me now. Not in front of everyone." His words cut her down in public, leaving her exposed. I saw the flinch in her shoulders, the widening of her eyes, and I knew finally she was beginning to question him. That doubt, small as it was, felt like the first ray of light breaking through years of clouds, but the groom wasn't about to let that seed grow. His voice rose louder, dragging me into his desperation. "This is what he wanted all along." He pointed straight at me. "He's trying to ruin us, to ruin you, because he can't stand not being the center of attention anymore. He's jealous." The room erupted with noise. Relatives shouted over one another, some saying they'd always trusted me, others muttering that maybe the old man really was bitter. Wine glasses clinked, voices sharpened, and the family that once looked polished and whole fractured before my eyes. I stayed where I was, my body still, my heart hammering but steady. I'd lived long enough to know that sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the strongest. It's the most afraid. And fear was pouring out of him now. Then it happened. The groom slammed his fist against the table so hard the silverware rattled. "If you keep this up," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage, "you'll regret it, all of you." Gasps filled the room. A few cousins shrank back in fear. Others exchanged wide-eyed looks. The mask he had worn so carefully all evening, the charm, the smug confidence was gone. In its place stood a man unhinged, his rage laid bare for everyone to see. For a moment, the silence was louder than his outburst. My daughter's face had gone pale, her lips trembled, but she forced words past them, her voice breaking like glass. "Enough." She stared at him, then turned her eyes toward me. "I need to know the truth." I didn't move. I didn't speak. My silence carried more weight than any speech I could give. I let her see the resolve in my eyes, the quiet promise that I would not waver this time. The groom, realizing what had slipped, cursed under his breath and stormed out of the room. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the walls vibrating with the echo. The family sat in stunned silence, some shaken, others pretending not to have seen what was right in front of them. And in that silence, I felt something shift. The illusion was broken. Tomorrow, I knew, the law would step in. The lies, the threats, the forgery, none of it could remain hidden forever. Tonight he had shown them his fury. Tomorrow, he would face the truth. The night had bled into silence, but morning brought no peace. My body felt heavy as I pushed myself out of bed, the echoes of last night still weighing me down, the image of him, the groom, my son-in-law slamming his fist on the table and storming out, lingered like a shadow. Around the house, family moved like ghosts. No one dared speak. Even the coffee pot hissed too loudly in the kitchen. At the table sat my daughter, shoulders slumped, her face pale in the thin morning light. She stared at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. I wanted to reach out, but the wall between us felt taller than ever. The envelope in my jacket pocket pressed against my chest, like a reminder the truth was still there. But it hadn't been heard. The stillness shattered with 3 hard knocks on the door. Heavy, deliberate. Everyone froze. My brother-in-law looked toward me, his eyes wide. I stepped forward, opened the door. And there they were, 2 police officers, solemn and firm, holding documents in their hands. "Are you Mr. Carter?" one asked. "Yes." My throat tightened. They handed me the papers. "We're here regarding allegations of financial fraud connected to the wedding expenses." Gasps erupted behind me. My daughter covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Fraud." I scanned the first page. My son-in-law's name glared back at me, inked alongside words that cut deep forged documents, suspicious transfers, pending investigation. My hands shook, but not from fear, from the sheer force of vindication. For the first time, the law itself stood beside me. Just as I turned, the front door banged open. He was back, disheveled, eyes wild. The groom stormed in and froze at the sight of the officers. "What is this?" he barked. "What kind of circus are you running, old man?" He spun toward me, finger jabbing the air. "You planted this. You've been trying to ruin me since day one." The officers stayed calm, one stepping slightly between us. "Sir, we're here for answers. We need you to explain these transactions." His face flushed red. He ranted, twisted words, called me senile, a liar, desperate for attention. The room was thick with tension until suddenly a sob cut through it. My daughter. She crumpled into her chair, tears spilling freely. "Stop," her voice cracked. "I can't keep pretending." Everyone fell silent. She looked at her husband with trembling hands. "I saw things. Months ago. Money moving where it shouldn't. Strange withdrawals. I asked you, and you said it was nothing." She shook her head violently. "I wanted to believe you. I wanted this marriage to be perfect." But now her words collapsed into sobs. The family murmured in shock. My heart ached seeing her finally broken, but also relieved her silence had cracked. The groom snarled, his mask gone. "You think you're so smart," he shouted at me. Then at her. "You'll regret this. All of you." He lunged forward, but the officers caught him, restraining his arms as he thrashed. My daughter buried her face in her hands, whispering through sobs, "Dad, I'm sorry." I stood still, the world slowing around me. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was the beginning of something harder, a battle not just for my name, but for my family's future. As they dragged him out, I clenched the envelope in my pocket. The reckoning had only begun. The courthouse steps felt like a mountain under my feet. Each step carried not just my body, but the weight of years of sacrifice. Years of watching my daughter grow, and years that had been shattered in a matter of days. The wooden doors loomed before me, tall and unyielding, much like the stairs I could already feel from those inside. When I finally entered, the sound of whispers followed, echoing through the marble hall like judgment before judgment itself. On one side sat my daughter, shoulders tense, eyes downcast. She couldn't even meet my gaze. Across from me, her new husband leaned back with a smug grin, whispering to his lawyer as if this was a show he'd already won. Relatives filled the benches, some glaring, others avoiding me entirely. A few I had once helped with rent or hospital bills now looked at me as if I were a stranger. The judge's gavel struck, silencing the restless room. The groom's lawyer rose first, smooth and practiced, his words sharp as knives. He painted me as a bitter old man, senile and vengeful, clinging to property I no longer understood. The words hit harder than any blow. I was reduced to a caricature. My life of work and sacrifice erased in moments. Laughter even bubbled from a corner. Stifled by a cough, I clenched my jaw, steadying myself. My lawyer squeezed my shoulder gently before rising. Then came a shift. Subtle but powerful. My lawyer approached the bench, lifting a folder that had been unopened until this moment. "Your Honor, new evidence has surfaced," he said firmly. Murmurs rippled across the room as he held up documents retrieved from my late wife's safety box. My breath caught. I hadn't even known those papers were still there. They bore her neat handwriting, dated years before, stating explicitly that ownership of our home and accounts remained under my name until my death. No transfer, no gift. Nothing my son-in-law had claimed was true. The groom's smirk faltered. The color drained from his face for just a flicker of a second, and the room gasped. Even my daughter shifted uncomfortably, her lips parting, as though realizing the ground beneath her had just cracked. The judge leaned forward, scanning the document carefully, and I felt a crack of light pierce the darkness I'd been drowning in. But the moment of relief was short-lived. "Call the next witness," the judge ordered. All eyes turned toward my daughter. She rose slowly, trembling, her hands clutched tightly in front of her. When she finally reached the stand, I could see her struggle between two worlds, the love she once had for me and the loyalty she had promised her husband. Her voice wavered under questioning. She tried to defend him at first, stammering excuses about stress, about how families misunderstand one another. But then came the harder questions: the bank transfers, the missing money, her role in ignoring signs. She froze, eyes wide, silence hanging heavy enough to crush the air from the room. The judge leaned in. "You understand the consequences of perjury, Mrs. Whitfield." The courtroom was silent, every ear straining, every breath caught. My heart ached as I watched her. In her face, I didn't just see the woman she was now, that I saw the little girl who used to clutch my hand, hiding behind me when thunder shook the windows. She lifted her eyes finally, meeting mine across the courtroom for the first time in weeks. They brimmed with tears, her lips trembling as though the truth itself burned on her tongue. And then she whispered not yet words, but the tremor of confession on the edge of release. The chapter ended there, suspended in that breath. The entire courtroom holding still, waiting for her to finally speak what had been buried for too long. The courtroom was still, the kind of silence that carried its own weight. Each tick of the clock echoed louder than footsteps, pressing against the nerves of everyone seated inside. My hands rested on the polished wood of the bench, palms flat, as though anchoring me to the moment. Across the aisle, my daughter sat rigid, her face pale, while the man she married leaned in close, whispering sharp, hurried words into her ear, even without hearing. I knew what they were: threats dressed as promises, chains disguised as vows. I bowed my head for a moment, not in defeat but in prayer. Not for myself, but for the truth to cut through the lies. I had already given decades to sacrifice, to silence, to enduring. What I asked for now was only dignity, the one thing no one had the right to steal. The judge's voice called the proceedings back to order. My lawyer rose, his tone measured but firm, as he placed the stack of documents on the evidence table. These weren't just papers. They were the unmasking of years of deception. Bank receipts, signed contracts, forged initials. Each page carried proof of betrayal. My lawyer spoke clearly. The deposits came from my accounts, money I never authorized to be used for their gain. He laid out the timeline, the fraud, the coercion. Every word struck like a hammer. The groom lost his composure. He stood abruptly, shouting that it was all a setup, that I was bitter, senile, clinging to what I couldn't use. But the more he screamed, the clearer it became. His face twisted with rage, his voice cracking with desperation. The The judge slammed the gavel, demanding silence. But the damage was already done. The jury wasn't just hearing the truth, they were seeing it unfold in flesh and blood. Then came the moment I feared and longed for. My daughter was called to the stand. She walked slowly, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. For weeks she had avoided my gaze, but now there was nowhere left to hide. She took the oath, voice trembling, and sat down in the witness chair. At first, she stumbled through her answers, trying to shield him, trying to shield herself. But when the questions turned to the forged transfers, her mask cracked. Her hands shook so violently, she gripped the edge of the chair to steady herself. Finally, tears spilled over. "I lied," she whispered, barely audible at first. Then louder, "I lied because he told me to. I was afraid." Gasps swept through the courtroom. My heart clenched, not in anger, but in the raw ache of watching my child trapped in her own chains. She turned her head toward me, eyes wet, her lips trembling. "Dad, you always owned it. You always gave everything. I was wrong." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, my chest felt lighter. Not healed, but lighter. The judge's ruling came swiftly. My property and accounts restored. The groom found guilty of fraud, sentenced for his crimes. Officers stepped forward, cuffs clicking around his wrists. He spat venom even as they dragged him away, but no one believed him anymore. The mask was gone. My daughter collapsed onto the stand, sobbing. I did not rush to her. Not yet. Justice had to be felt in full before forgiveness could even begin. But my eyes softened, because despite everything, she was still my child. As the gavel struck for the final time, I gripped the bench so hard my knuckles whitened, tears blurring my sight. Not tears of loss, but of something harder, earned justice. That evening, I walked home alone. The courthouse lights faded behind me, replaced by the familiar quiet of my own street. My steps were slow, deliberate, every one of them echoing the weight of what had passed. The house stood where it always had, weathered but steady, much like me. I placed my hand on the doorframe, feeling the grooves my late wife and I once painted over together. There was no victory dance, no cheer, just peace. Peace that came from knowing the truth had been spoken, and that dignity had outlasted betrayal. I stood there for a long moment, the evening air cool against my face, and whispered into the silence. I stood my ground, and I'm still here.